The Vengeance of the Witchfinder by John Bellairs and Brad Strickland, Chapter 2. In all, Lewis and his uncle spent 3 exhausting but enjoyable days shopping and seeing the sights. They visited the Tower of London, that ancient brooding fortress on the River Thames, where in the old days prisoners had lost their heads to the executioner's axe. Lewis was interested to learn that when Henry VIII had had his wife Anne Boleyn beheaded, he had ordered something special. The headsman had used a fine French sword instead of an ordinary axe. Lewis wondered if that had made much difference to poor Anne, and Jonathan said it probably had not. But then it was the thought that counted. They saw Buckingham Palace, where the King of England lived, and they watched the ceremony of the changing of the guard. They explored the busy, bustling, and mysterious old city of London, finding something new at every street corner and down every narrow alley. Uncle Jonathan enjoyed himself as long as he could poke about in bookshops and curiosity shops, and soon his normal good humor returned. Everything went very smoothly, and to his surprise, Lewis found himself walking miles every day with enthusiasm. Usually he did not much care for exercise because he thought of himself as clumsy and heavy, but now these long strolls gave him more energy. He did occasionally complain about the English food, which he considered bland and odd-tasting, but he kept so busy that he hardly thought about that except at mealtimes. Finally, Lewis and Jonathan checked out of their Mayfair hotel and caught a train to the village of Dinsdale down in Sussex, the countryside well to the south and west of London. "Why are we going to Dinsdale?" Lewis asked his uncle for the 10th or 12th time that day. Jonathan had been very secretive about this part of the trip and had announced their destination only that morning. "Well, I suppose it's time to spring my surprise," said Jonathan, leaning back in his seat. They had a first-class compartment all to themselves and sat facing each other. Jonathan put his thumbs into his vest pocket, as he often did while talking, and said, "I don't know if your father ever mentioned it, Lewis, but our family has a long history. A good part of that history took place here in England." Lewis's father and mother had both died several years before in an automobile accident. Ever since, Lewis had lived with his uncle in New Zebedee. In a way, he had become used to his parents being gone. Still, it always hurt when somebody or someone suddenly reminded Lewis of his mom and dad. No, he never mentioned it," Lewis said in a low voice, trying not to look upset. Jonathan appeared not to notice Lewis's discomfort. Gazing out the window, he said, "I'm not surprised. Charlie was an optimist, always looking ahead. The past never interested him much. Still, it is true that we have English roots. On your grandmother's side of the family, we are Dutch. She was a Van Olden before she met your grandfather. I don't know what the Barnevelds were back in the very old days. That name sounds Germanic to me, but I've never researched it. However, for ages and ages, the Barnevelds lived in merry old England. In fact, one of our ancestors came across the English Channel with William the Conqueror in 1066. Many of our latter forefathers were knights serving British kings. My great-great-great-grandfather, Tobias Barneveld, was the younger son of one of those Sir something or other Barnevelds. Since Tobias's father willed everything to the older brother, great-great-great-grandpa Tobias emigrated to America way back in 1795. He landed in Boston, where he founded our branch of the family. Eventually, his son moved his family west to New Zebedee in the 1840s. The train was out of the city now, and it picked up speed as it passed lush woods and green fields. I still don't know what all that has to do with where we're going," said Lewis. "I'm getting to that. The British branch of the family has a manor house in West Sussex, not very far from Dinsdale village. That is where we are going to visit our umpteenth cousin, who knows how many times removed. His name is Arthur Pelham Barnevelt. He got to know your father back during the war, when Charlie was in the Army Air Corps and stationed at an airfield not far from Dinsdale. Now Cousin Pelham is eager to meet us." "And he lives in a real manor house?" Lewis asked, his tone excited. You mean one like Baskerville Hall and the Hound of the Baskervilles?" "Right," said Jonathan with a smile and nod. "Only the name of this one is Barnevelt Manor. We're going to spend tonight and tomorrow there getting to know Cousin Pelham." Jonathan paused, his expression thoughtful. After a moment he added, "I don't want to give you the wrong impression, Lewis. It's true Cousin Pelham is the owner of a genuine manor house. Unfortunately, he is not rich. The British branch of the family suffered financial losses during both world wars, and taxes are extremely high right now. Very little remains of Cousin Pelham's family fortune except the estate and a modest income. What I'm trying to say is that we will have to be tactful. Sure, said Louis. Only why can't we, help out with the expenses? Jonathan smiled. We will, as much as we can without hurting Cousin Pelham's pride. He tapped a bulky brown paper-wrapped parcel that he had brought all the way from New York. Louis knew it contained two tinned hams, a package of sugar, containers of coffee and tea and cocoa, and other goodies. For instance, I know that Cousin Pelham won't mind us bringing him a care package because he always complains in his letters about the rationing that is still in force over here. But remember, in British eyes, we are American upstarts. Even if I did inherit a pile of money from my grandfather. I've been writing to Pelham for some years, and I've sort of gotten to know him. I am sure he would resent anything that seriously smacked of charity. Louis said he understood. The ride took a long time, but at last the train jolted and hissed to a halt at a small station in the country village of Dinsdale. Jonathan and Louis got off the train and collected their suitcases. For a few minutes they stood there on the platform, and then an Austin 7, a tiny black old-fashioned open automobile, came chugging and backfiring along. It creaked to a halt, and a spidery man sprang out. His hair was a silvery explosion. His face was lean and long, and his body was all elbows and knees. He wore dark gray tweed trousers and a rather shabby jacket with leather patches at the elbows. He sported a bright red tie. The second he saw Jonathan, the man's pale gray eyes lit up. "Cousin!" he called in a crickety voice. "I say, Cousin Jonathan, you're just like a larger expanded version of your younger brother, with a beard added. I'd know you anywhere. Welcome. And you must be young Louis. Come along, come along. We'll nip right out to the manor and give you something to nibble on. I'm sure Mrs. Goodring, she's my housekeeper, quite a treasure, will have something delicious." He helped them load their bags into the cramped auto, which proved to be something like assembling a jigsaw puzzle. They got in, making the boxy little car groan on its springs. Finally, Cousin Pelham climbed back behind the steering wheel, which was on the right side rather than the left. "All set? Hold on, here we go." The poor old car strained its engine and chugged away from the station at 15 miles an hour. "Tell me if I go too fast for you," said Pelham in an anxious tone. Louis could hardly feel a breeze, even in the open car, but Pelham Barnevelt seemed to think they were barreling right along. Louis liked this distant cousin at once. The lean old man spoke and moved like a boy more than an adult, and his cheery enthusiasm was infectious. For a while they puttered along a narrow road between hilly grass pastures, dotted white with grazing sheep. Then they turned into a long, winding drive. "Here we are," said Pelham. He nodded toward a tiny brick cottage. "That used to be the gatekeeper's house, when we had someone to keep the gate. And now, just around this turn, is my ancestral home, and yours as well, Jonathan and Louis. Welcome to Barnevelt Manor." The car rounded an overgrown, untidy mass of hedges, and Louis gasped. Ahead of them sprawled a huge gray stone house with leaded windows, 2 turrets, and what seemed a dozen bay windows, numerous gables, and intricate, steeply pitched roof shingles with shiny black slate. The late morning sun shone on the old house, and yet its dark, gloomy walls gave the dismal impression of being in deep shade. It looked evil, Louis thought. He immediately wondered why the notion had come to him. After all, as Cousin Pelham had said, it was his ancestral home, and surely Sherlock Holmes would scoff off the very idea of a baleful haunted house. He was just being a worrywart again. And yet, too much of the house was obviously empty. Too many windows stared out at the world with the hollow expression of a skull's vacant eye sockets. Within a curving drive, the grass lay neatly trimmed, but outside that border, the lawn and hedges had grown rank and thick. On the tallest chimney perched a gaunt black bird, a rook with hunched shoulders and lowered head. Everything had a distinct and oppressive air of decay and decline. The house almost looked as if it were giving them a fleshless, threatening grin of sinister welcome. Louis felt his heart sink. Cousin Pelham was chattering away. Uncle Jonathan was smiling and relaxed. Neither of them appeared to notice anything unusual. And yet, Louis thought again, it looks so evil. And that is the end of chapter 2.